global, leading Britain's conversation. The Nigel Farage Show.
Mr. Nigel Farage.
Thank you, Donald, and good evening, everybody. Well, it was David Cameron as Prime Minister who thought we should show the world what decent, civilised people we were by upping our commitment to our spending on foreign aid to 0.7% of our annual GDP. He did it, and we've kept at it, and indeed Theresa May maintained that commitment in the last general election manifesto. It means that we are one of the highest spenders in the world on foreign aid. And there are many people that think it shows what a decent and civilised country we are. I have to say that I've always been deeply sceptical of foreign aid. My belief has always been that if you want to help poor countries become richer, then you offer them trade, not aid. And I've always felt, actually, outside the European Union, getting rid of the crippling tariffs we put on poor countries, on their agricultural products, their cut flowers, whatever it may be, we could help them. And I've always thought that foreign aid was going to rich people in poor countries and not often reaching the right target. So I come at this from a very sceptical position. By the way, if there's an earthquake or a tsunami or a disaster, I'm one of the first. I'm very happy to get my credit card out and donate money. I'm very happy to help with genuine humanitarian relief. But foreign aid, where a cheque gets sent to a foreign government, often even a dictatorship every year, I don't think the money gets to the right place. And I also feel that for the country receiving it, it damages their own credit ratings and doesn't help them get out of the mess they're in. But some new revelations over the course of the last 2 days have maybe become more sceptical still. For example, to meet the 0.7% target, we find that the Department of Energy and Climate Change spend 98% of their aid pot in the final quarter of the year. It's as if they're desperate to get rid of the money in the last few weeks, just so that they can meet what I believe to be a pretty arbitrary target. And then we find out today we find out that of the money pledged by the United Kingdom to overseas bodies, 8.7 billion of it is still uncashed. So you could say, well, the money hasn't actually physically left the country, but it's there in the accounts. So we're rushing to spend the money to meet the targets according to whatever calculation we have of GDP. And by the way, our GDP is now bigger because we include drug dealing and prostitution. No, I'm not making this up. It's true. Our GDP grew by 1.3 billion when those two factors were taken into account. And then we find of the money we've pledged, actually, all these intergovernmental organisations haven't been able to spend it. And I just wonder whether the time has come for a real, genuine rethink. Is it time to drop the mandatory target and to spend the foreign aid budget on a case-by-case basis? And I think the answer to that is a very big yes. If you agree with me, call on 0345 60 60 973, or perhaps you think, Farage, you are being nasty, small-minded, unchristian. Surely the answer is to shower the third world with money, in which case, of course, you can text at 84850, or you might be one of those people who, like me, is bad, nasty, evil and mean-spirited. You might even think that charity begins at home and there are some deserving people in this country, in which case, of course, you can tweet Farage and LBC at LBC. And, of course, you can watch the show live on Facebook by going to lbc.co.uk. I suspect with this particular subject, there'll be no shortage of opinion. And we'll begin with Henry in Cambridge. Henry, good evening.
Good evening, Nigel. I just, because I was listening to Jacob Rees-Mogg on Question Time, and the last one.
Henry,
on the head with this.
Henry, is there any subject that doesn't lead to Mogg mania? But no, I mean, go on, please, go on.
Well, I thought I agree. I'm in Mogmentum but I think he. I think he hit the nail on the head when he was on Question Time.
Yep.
On this issue, that it's trade, not aid.
Yep.
And that we should reduce the amount that we're spending, because because politicians like to say, "Oh, isn't it great? We're spending this much on it." Well, what are we actually spending it on? And I think we should spend it. We should look at what we want to achieve with it, and be more efficient with it. And if it's simply giving to charity, then we should let private individuals do that, and it shouldn't be taxpayers' money.
Which, by the way, Henry, we do. We are the most generous giver of charity to overseas and particularly disaster relief of any country in the world. You know, we do this naturally anyway. So, as far as you're concerned, it's trade, not aid, and it's Rees-Mogg for PM.
Absolutely.
Very good. Henry, thank you. There's no escape. Mogmania is here. It's happening. I wonder whether other broadcasters are seeing the same thing that we're seeing, but we are really seeing something over the course of the last few weeks. Harry from Walthamstow, is it time to get rid of the arbitrary target and to look at things on a case-by-case basis?
Good evening, Nigel.
Good evening.
Yes, it certainly is. I cannot understand the logic of a country which is deeply in debt, and increasingly so, borrowing money just to give it away.
Harry, there is something beautifully simple about that point you've just made, and you're absolutely right. And I wonder whether people actually understand that, Harry. Because we're borrowing over £50 billion every single year. So you could argue that every penny of the foreign aid budget, and by the way, it's £13 billion a year, folks, £13 billion a year. That is about £35 million every single day. And as Harry from Walthamstow points out, we have to borrow the money and pay interest on it to do it. It's mad, Harry, isn't it?
Can I give you an example of the crazy logic, Nigel?
Do.
Big excuse for this overseas aid is it leads to trade.
Yeah.
And we do very well out of it. Now, if you look back a few years, the Indian Air Force was looking to replace its jets with modern generation. And as I understand it, we give India £500 million a year, and so they bought French.
Now, they are talking, Harry, about aid to India ending, aren't they? But I've always found it very odd that we give money to a country who've got nuclear weapons, a space programme, and you know what they've also got? They've got aircraft carriers with aeroplanes on them, which we haven't even got. So I've always found it very, very odd.
Crazy logic. I suspect that the problem is that whatever money we give abroad, a percentage stays in this country, and it's a case of one for me, one for you, one for me, one for you. And there's too many people making money out of it this side of the channel.
Oh, are you talking about the whole sort of aid industry?
Indeed.
Gosh, you're a real sceptic, Harry, aren't you?
I certainly am. When is my money going down the drain? I certainly am.
Right. And Harry, let me ask you, if you saw there'd been some horrendous, earthquake in a poor part of the world, would you feel inclined perhaps to give money towards disaster relief?
Not now. Not
now?
after the last few years. No,
What?
I'm so cynical now with all this splashing the cash and making these politicians look good strutting the world stage that I think, okay, divert some of the overseas aid to it.
But do we, Harry, do you not feel that perhaps we have, as a relatively rich country, albeit one that's borrowing money, but a relatively rich country, do we not have some sense of moral obligation to those in the world less fortunate than us?
Well, there's an old saying that if you kill the goose, it lays no more golden eggs. And this country, as I say, is in dire financial straits, and we're getting worse. Mm-hmm. We're looking towards a moderately hard time with Brexit until things perk up when we leave the EU. But in the meantime, we've got to tighten our belts, which means everybody, not just the taxpayer in the UK.
Harry, no, you've made some good points. I thank you very much indeed for your call. Good evening, sir, I get by text. I say we should do it on a case-by-case basis. That's what Honey says. Charity starts at home. How can we give away so much foreign aid and not pay our NHS and emergency services appropriately? Not fair, not right, says Ollie. On Twitter, Nigel, we are not the biggest spender on foreign aid. We are the biggest borrower for it. And that comes from awful lapses on Twitter, a point that Harry just made. Stephen in Wandsworth, come on, tell me that everybody so far in this show is wrong and that actually this money is well spent and it makes us better people.
First of all, Nigel, it's my first time on, and I've been trying to speak to you for ages. Thank you for everything you've done. No, I think it's one of the biggest wastes of money going for many reasons. I mean, some of the things have already been, you know, we're giving money to China, who have got a great military budget. We're giving money to India for their space program. When there's people over here on the breadline, can't get decent housing. But the thing that is also I wanted to talk about was about the NHS service. That we keep hearing that with Brexit we're going to lose a lot of nurses who apparently have come from EU countries. Now, my wife is from the Philippines, and she works with the NHS over here.
Yep.
And we've been to the Philippines many times. And I remember a few years ago, there was a bit of concern over here that a lot of our nurses were coming from countries like the Philippines and Sri Lanka. And some people thought maybe we were taking too many nurses from there. They wouldn't have enough for themselves. Well, I can tell you in the Philippines, there's no shortage of nurses and no shortage of people who want to go into that profession. I think we should send some of our foreign aid money to countries like that, specifically to build their colleges for a nursing foundation so that they can keep on training people, and some of them could come over here and be ready trained to join our NHS service.
Well, Stephen, if we felt, and if so far all the sceptical callers felt, that the foreign aid budget was being spent wisely and training people in relatively poor countries to be nurses and doctors would be a good way of spending it, regardless whether they stay there or come here. I think the worry, Stephen, is that we give the money and it doesn't reach the right target. That, I think, Stephen, is the problem with foreign aid spending. And I just wonder, Stephen, whether, and you know, you've just put to me a case-by-case basis, but does it make any sense to keep an arbitrary 0.7% target of GDP?
No, not at all. As people say, put your own house in order first. You know, we've got people on the breadline over here, people going to food banks over here, lots of homeless people over here, and people are really struggling over here.
A lot to do.
We can't even get a pay rise for, you know...
Of more than 1%. Stephen, first-time caller from Wandsworth, thank you very much indeed for your point. You're listening to The Nigel Farage Show here on LBC, and it's 7:15. Well, about 80% of people think that David Cameron's target of spending 0.7% of our national GDP on foreign aid on a purely arbitrary basis is wrong. But we're not a mean-spirited people. We're very generous with charity. Surely we should spend money on a case-by-case basis. And I've raised this tonight because we learn that £8 billion of money that we've committed from our foreign aid budget has as yet been unused by international agencies. But what about where we spend the money? Well, I've mentioned India already. You know, giving money to a country that has actual, genuine working aircraft on their carriers, unlike us, is something. But we've also been giving money to Argentina. Yes, that's right, Argentina, who still have a claim over the Falkland Islands and have been buying fighter jets from China. So we've actually been giving money to a regime that could use some of that money to fund military jets to fight against our people. Mad. We've been giving money to Iran. We've been giving money to China. And, you know, hold on to the chair. We've been giving money to Mugabe's Zimbabwe. And if you thought it couldn't possibly get any worse than that, our Prime Minister, Mrs May, was asked a question just a couple of months ago over whether we gave aid to North Korea. And the Prime Minister didn't really seem to know. Have a listen to this.
Does North Korea receive money from the aid budget from the UK?
Well, the gentleman has suggested that it is. I don't know the details of that.
It's about £4 million in 2015.
£4 million?
Yeah.
OK. You, sir, in the red and white checked shirt.
So you're the Prime Minister of the country and you don't know where that foreign aid is going to, whether it's going to the government or it's actually going to benefit its people.
Well, if we are putting money into... When we put money into countries, we change the way that we spend the foreign aid budget. In the past, foreign aid budget was all too often just given to governments. And you know the stories in the past of the way the money was then spent. So we work through NGOs. We work through organisations that are helping people.
So what the Prime Minister was really saying was, I'm sorry, I haven't got a clue, I've no idea, I've never actually looked at where we spend the foreign aid budget, I just support it because it's part of the virtue signalling of being a modern politician. It makes me look lovely and kind and cuddly and wonderful. And yes, we're giving money to North Korea. Surely this madness has got to stop. This idea that departments in the last few weeks before financial year end have to start promising money everywhere, otherwise they can't meet their target. And then we learn that some of it goes to the wrong places and some of it gets committed and isn't even being spent at all. And I'm asking you, well, of course, you know my view. I think the whole thing's bonkers. And we should only look at this on a case-by-case basis. But I'm inviting anybody out there that thinks I am nasty and mean-spirited and cruel and a bad human being to tell me why. Please ring 0345 6060 973 and explain to me why giving money to North Korea is the right thing to do. The lines are open. Aaron in Northampton, are you happy with a foreign aid contribution?
Well, to be honest, good evening, Nigel.
Good evening.
To be honest, I didn't really know a lot of the facts that you just said then, but I must admit, I suppose I am, because the way I see it is that all these other countries out there, some of them that you mentioned, obviously are well off. I didn't know that we send money to them countries, but I thought that we sent money to the countries that needed the money. That was what I always thought.
Well, do you know what, Aaron? Do you know what? If we sent money to countries that genuinely needed it, and if I felt confident that money was reaching the right people, I would not be saying the things I've said over the course of the last 25 minutes on this programme. And I, as I've said, Aaron, I do believe in disaster relief. The right thing is to help people who are in dire straits. I'm very happy, to ring up the number and give my credit card number. No problem with that at all. My problem, Aaron, is that something that is a good idea, frankly, has been hijacked by an industry. Theresa May saying, we trust the NGOs, the non-governmental organisations to do this. Well, I don't. It's in their self-interest this continues. So, Aaron, this is, let me promise you, this is not about being nasty or anti-foreign people in different countries. It's about a prudent use of our taxpayers' money.
No, which is fair enough. I understand that. That is a very good point. Like I said, when I was on hold listening, I didn't know some of the facts that you said. And I must admit, I was quite shocked when I heard the North Korea bit especially. That shocked me. Yeah. That really did shock me. But at the same time, like what you said, cutting it down, I suppose we could cut it down. But if we were, would the problems at home, would they really be solved? I don't think they would be. That's my point. That's what I'd like to make. I just think no matter what we do, no matter how much money we spend, I just think we'll always be in the situation we are in at the current time, because nothing will happen. That's my opinion.
No, I mean, look, Aaron, 14 billion pounds a year. It's a vast sum of money when a district hospital only costs about 250 million quid to build. But by the same token, it is less than 1% of our national income. But do you know what, Aaron? You add up this 1%, you add up the 1% that goes to the European Union, and it's the old saying from Warren Buffett, the sage of Omaha, one of the richest men in the world, and he once said, you know what, $1 billion here, $1 billion there, and soon you're talking real money. Aaron, I thank you for your call. And there we are. You see, the point about a programme like this is that if we get the right facts out, people listen, engage, and they can change their minds. Foreign aid should be for disaster relief. It's up to individuals to decide which charities to support from their own pockets. Cheeky Latte on Twitter tells me, send the aid, and they need material goods, just like you would for a homeless person, says Chris Edmond. Well, again, Chris, if it's targeted to the right people, you're not going to get the level of rejection we're getting. Our feeling is it's not. Let's stop giving foreign aid and see if it makes any difference other than bringing our nation's debt down, says Adrian Blake from Stroud in Gloucestershire. And on Twitter, Janard says to me, give it to me. I need it, and I know where to spend it. I don't think you really do. Ahmed in Watford, have we got this right or wrong with the foreign aid budget? Good evening.
Hi, Nigel. Yeah, just like to make a few points. firstly, I think it's most worth noting the fact that giving less than 1% of our GDP is not all too much money, and I'd like to clarify on that. There's a couple of things. When we talk about giving foreign aid, we need to note that it's not charity that we're giving. We're essentially buying influence. We're buying political gain.
This is the soft power argument, Ahmed. This is the argument that foreign aid is actually part of our foreign policy, yeah?
Yeah, no, I think that's correct, and personally I do agree with that. Now, that's not me saying that we shouldn't be giving money to other countries and people who need it most. It's more a case of us criticising and critiquing our own government to assess where our money is going. Are we giving money to build airports in private islands that are Commonwealth islands, or are we perhaps giving money to those suffering in Iraq and Yemen and Syria, people who really, really need it? I read a report actually online not too long ago which mentioned that we are making 7 times more from the arms deals we are giving to Saudi Arabia, which are being used to bomb Yemen, than we are in the amount of money we're giving in aid to Yemen. And I think it's then worth noting that, it's not a clear black and white board where you have money that could be spent here or there. It's more a case of we are giving money and we should be giving money because we are, at the end of the day, the 6th richest economy in the world. But how are we giving money, and are we using it to buy political
So if
gain?
we're using, Ahmed, if we're using our foreign aid budget as an arm of our foreign policy, effectively we're engaging in bribery, yeah?
Yeah, I mean, look, Nigel, I think one thing you have to notice is I don't mean you personally, but the political class generally need to stop calling it charity. I do think it's a superiority complex, and for us to be able to say, yes, we're giving charity to poorer countries, I don't think that's right. I think we need to, if we are philanthropic and we are British, as we like to say, then we need to be assessing which people need it the most.
Do you know what, Ahmed?
I do think it's wrong to...
Do you know what?
Be clearly saying that, yeah.
Us assessing it, and your argument about, soft power, as it's called, foreign policy, I mean, I do understand the argument, but here's another problem. Yet another problem, folks, with the foreign aid budget, that a third of it, we don't decide how the money's spent. The European Union, yes, that's right, folks, my old friends in Brussels, the European Union and the UN, Ahmed, tell us how to spend a third of it. So whichever way you look at this, it's a mess, isn't it?
Nigel, whether it's a third of, if it's 0.7% or if it's 5.7%, it will still be a third, right? I think the argument is the 2/3 that we are choosing how to spend. Why are we giving to the places which are the wrong places? You mentioned India earlier on. You mentioned Iran. You mentioned North Korea.
Yeah.
Do you, Nigel, I'd like to ask you, do you think we're giving money to these countries for any other reason than political gain?
No.
Because I'd find it very strange if we were giving money to Iran or to India, which is obviously one of the fastest growing economies in the world.
No.
Purely because they need money.
I may well, Ahmed, agree with you. I may well agree with you. Maybe the foreign aid budget is part of a massive international bribery scam. Ahmed, you may well be right. Either way, I'm not comfortable with how our money is being spent, who has a say over how we spend our money and where it's going. I think the whole thing is a complete shambles. You're listening to The Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. It's 7:30 now. We're desperate to spend 0.7% of our GDP on foreign aid, yet we learn today that 8 billion of it still hasn't been spent to the overseas agencies to whom we've committed the money. And then we find the bits that have been spent have gone to places like North Korea. And I'm saying this whole thing is crazy. We're not mean-spirited. We're not nasty. Far from it. But we've just about had enough of foreign aid being money taken from poor people in rich countries and given to rich people in poor countries. And we've had enough of it. We want the money spent on a case-by-case basis and spent sensibly. Now, talking about money and government largesse, HS2, that railway line that means we can all get to Birmingham 18 minutes quicker, or Manchester, I think it's 47 minutes quicker, although the last time I went to Manchester, I got on at Euston. It was 2 hours and 2 minutes to the centre of the business district in Manchester. I had a bacon sandwich with brown sauce, a couple of cups of tea, read the newspapers, and before I knew it, I was there. So I've always wondered why we actually need HS2. Well, Chris Grayling, the Transport Secretary, was called into the House of Commons last night at 10 o'clock to make a statement. And he said, it is incredible, inconceivable, and simply nonsense to suggest that the cost of HS2 is set to spiral. Well, folks, if you think the foreign aid budget is expensive, run your eyes along this. The original estimate was that HS2 would cost £55 billion. But the latest departmental estimate is that HS2 will now cost £111 billion. That is the official figure. And certainly there are one or two MPs, Kelvin Hopkins from Luton and others, saying that they've had briefings, secret briefings, leaking out of the Department of Transport, suggesting that in the end, the bill for this could be as much as £200 billion. That is 4 years of our annual deficit at the current rate. This, folks, is the biggest single spending project any British government has undertaken since World War II. It is massive. And yes, I'm opposed to it. And why am I opposed to it? Because for a fraction of this money, we could update broadband right across rural parts of this country. We could help train services. Do you know, it's slower now to go by train from Paddington down to Penzance than it was before the First World War. I mean, that to me seems almost unbelievable. We could spend a quarter or a third of this budget and update and modernise the internet and train services for the benefit of millions of people. I feel very, very strongly about it, but please, if you think I've got this completely wrong, and that HS2 is going to be fabulous and is somehow going to regenerate the north of England, which I don't believe it will, then, of course, on Farage at LBC, tweet in what you think. So we're back to the foreign aid budget. I'm going to Charlie in East Grinstead. Charlie, good evening to you. Are you happy with the way we're spending our money on foreign aid?
No, I'm not actually. I think it's actually morally wrong, and I think you're being slightly inconsistent, Nigel, with the examples that you've given.
Okay.
I'll just give you an example here. If the Red Cross were to come up to you in the street and steal money from your wallet, you would call that morally wrong, and you'd say it shouldn't be allowed, would you not?
Yes.
Now, those people, the people in the Red Cross, undeniably do work that saves people literally on the point of starvation. Now, as far as I'm concerned, the government is exactly the same. It may want to help people that are on the point of starvation, that are literally at the very end of their lives. It is still morally wrong to take money away from people to give to those people. And you yourself have acknowledged that, at least implicitly, in the fact that you wouldn't allow the Red Cross to do it. So I just say it's morally wrong. Get rid of all of it, totally.
And do it through charity, Charlie?
Voluntary charity, absolutely. If people want to help people, and if they want to call themselves good people, they've got to do it voluntarily. It's all very well for these people saying, oh, it's just awful, you want to get rid of the foreign aid budget. Oh, let's just get a handle of this for a moment. You're saying that I should be forced, with the threat of jail if I don't pay my taxes, so you can fulfil your altruism. That's morally wrong.
Would you, Charlie? I mean, Charlie, let me ask you. If we move to that kind of system, would you yourself be happy to give money towards foreign aid or disaster relief?
No, not me personally. I would rather give my money to institutes such as the RSPCA. I'm more concerned with animal welfare. No, I would not give my money to people in starving circumstances.
Okay,
but I'm sure there are people out there that would, and if they want to feel good about themselves, they should have the ability to do that voluntarily, not force people such as myself and people such as you to do what they want done for them.
So it's morally wrong for government, through taxation, to take away our choice as to whether we give some of our money to these projects.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much indeed, Charlie. You made your point very clearly indeed. Ali on Facebook says, remove all funding. Most of it is going to the EU anyway. Well, not most of it, Ali, but some of it is. And up to a third of our foreign aid budget is not spent in ways that we decide, we're told, how to spend it. And the EU's part of that. Craig says, we bizarrely send foreign aid to North Korea. Just shows how we waste money within that department. The foreign aid budget should be slashed and funds redistributed to schools, hospitals, police, etc. Craig, it's a very popular point of view. Lynn says, we should have a referendum on whether we pay foreign aid or not. That would give everyone else something to think about and argue about. Well, it certainly would, Lynn. I think I know the result already, actually. Certainly, if the callers, texters and tweeters that I'm getting in tonight are representative of public opinion, actually, I think they probably are. Anthea says foreign aid at its present level is total madness. It appears to be inadequately checked as to where the money is actually spent. We have great need in this country for funding housing, healthcare and education. Rosa suggests by text, if we ring-fenced our foreign aid to pay off our national debt, it would all be paid off in 8 years. Rosa, no. It's a lovely idea, but in fact that is not the case. In fact, it would take, I'm trying to work it out, nearly 200 years, I think, of foreign aid to pay off what the current national debt is. It would help, Rosa, but don't forget, our national debt is now 1.7 trillion. So, and again, let's all get some perspective, folks, on this. 13 to 14 billion pounds a year is a lot of money when you can build a new hospital for 250 million quid, but it is still less than 1% of the national cake. So sense of perspective is needed. Abby in Chelsea, good evening.
Hello, Nigel. I'd like to first start by saying that as a Brit of Indian origin, I do not find you in the slightest racist or bigoted or all the other nasty things people say about you for making a completely reasonable point.
Well, thank you. Well, thank you. I generally find, Abby, that the people that tend to call me racist tend to be upper middle class white people who've got very rich mummies and daddies and absolutely no perspective on the world at all. But thank you. But no, go on, please.
Well, first of all, let me add to that now. I'm Abhay Singh, the gentleman who's going to debate with you and defend you on the Brexit debate a couple of years ago. If you remember, I do. You had said.
I do. I've got who you are now, right? Yes.
And I actually wanted to defend you because it incenses me when people call you the things they do when you're standing up for your country. I love you. You've read my articles on India. I love India passionately,
yes.
But I love Britain too. And it's not it's very simple. It's just logical stuff. The first point here is we're being very unfair to British people who are paying their money and sending this money abroad when there's so many problems back at home. I don't like to use cliches, but cliches are cliches because they're true. Charity begins at home, especially when you have so many problems. The second point is, and we have to accept this, we're very disingenuous and we lie to our own people and the world about what the aid is. It's often, as has been said many times, bribery, sheer bribery. In India, the case in 2012, a government minister, I've forgotten his name, said it was basically to get the Eurofighter contract, which after India rejected, we changed our tune with them. India also spent, I think they give £2.53 billion worth of salaries to Britain. So do you think a country like India, now the third largest in the world in terms of purchasing power parity, almost $10 trillion economy, and on the way to become the largest in the world, do you think they really need that aid? It's been said many times that it makes absolutely no difference.
No difference at all, no.
So let's not lie to British people, and let's also be fair to British people, the hard-working, beautiful working people of this country who put so much into the country. Let's first put these billions back and solve the problems we have here.
Yeah, and the best thing we could do to help countries like India, Abby, in my view, and not every person in Britain will like this, but actually, if we looked at countries like that and we gave them free trade deals and took away the massive tariffs that this wonderful European Union puts on them, that would help them more than any foreign aid ever could, Abby, in my opinion.
I don't agree with you there. I think we should have good bilateral trade deals. I think a country like India, a powerful country like India, would swamp Britain. So I'm saying it from British point of view.
Okay.
Free trade deals are a very bad idea for a country like Britain with more power.
No, but I mean, if we're dealing with, say, someone like Kenya, who have got a cut flour market, who've got green beans or whatever, we put such huge tariffs on their product. It's difficult for them to sell their produce into our markets at a competitive price, isn't it?
Absolutely, yes. And I'd love to, by the way, take the public platform and defend you, because I think people understanding that an Indian person with brown skin, by the way, coming and saying that Nigel Farage is not a racist, he has a very valid set of points, to make for the country, is not a bad thing. I think we should take that up again at some stage.
Well, I thank you. No, and we'll do that, and I thank you very much, and it's nice to make your acquaintance again, and thank you. Well, a real supporter. Had some screamers on last night that hated me, so we got to balance it out. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC, and it's 7:45. Billions of pounds of our foreign aid budget that's been committed to foreign agencies simply hasn't been spent, and it's brought bigger questions, I think, to bear on how we spend the money, where we spend the money, who authorises the spending of that money. And I have to say, my view very strongly is that the whole thing is a complete and utter shambles. And so far, many people do agree with me. Oliver says on Facebook, forcing departments to spend money they can't think how to is just a colossal waste of money. Case by case for definite. Oliver, that's my view. We're not being mean-spirited, we're not being nasty, we're happy to help, but let's look at the merits of each spending case. Jean says, let the celebrities pay foreign aid. They're always whining on about these things. Nigel, what bugs me is that we are borrowing this money. A point that was raised earlier, that as we're running a massive budget deficit, effectively, we're borrowing money, having to pay interest on those borrowings to give away money as foreign aid. Wayne from Southgate, I understand, takes, at last we've got somebody who takes a different point of view. Wayne, good evening.
Good evening. Nigel, listen, I heard you peddling this nonsense about foreign aid is taking money from poor people to give to rich people overseas.
Yeah.
That is not the case. Where the money is spent? The money is spent in the donor countries. 80 to 90% of foreign aid is spent in this country on goods and services, and about 10 to 20% overseas.
What do you mean, Wayne?
And I can tell you that because I've worked on foreign aid projects overseas. For example, when the Canadians were upgrading airports in the Caribbean,
yeah,
we had a company that actually distributed British goods, and we could not get our product onto that project, even though it was a better solution because it was not Canadian. And that's the truth of aid from all donor countries worldwide.
So, Wayne, let me just clarify the point you're making. The point you're making is Canada commits to spending money in a Caribbean island. Okay, let's get back to your point. So Canada commits to helping build a new airport in an island in the Caribbean, and what you're arguing is that the money to build that airport, those contracts go to Canadian companies, yeah?
Yes, that's the Canadian consultants who design it. Similarly, when British provide foreign aid to countries, you'll have British consultants engaged to provide designs. You'll have British goods as part of the solution, and that's how foreign aid works. And it provides jobs in all the donor countries.
Well,
so
the Prime Minister, Wayne, the Prime Minister slightly contradicts your view of this, because the Prime Minister, and we heard that clip earlier where she was so excruciatingly embarrassed about the fact that her government's been giving money to North Korea, of all people, but when she was asked this question, she said, no, we give the money to the NGOs. And the NGOs don't owe any loyalty to any nation at all, do they?
That might be so in one or two small cases, Nigel. But look, if you look at, you could look at various, the National Audit Report on DFID and the various agencies, government agencies, where the last time they were complaining about fees and the rates that consultants here were charging and so on. And that is a fact of life. That's why all countries run foreign aid budgets. It's part of the soft diplomacy internationally. It gets you in the headline, it gets you ticked in the UN and that sort of thing.
I do understand that, Wayne. I do understand that it's become an arm of foreign policy, Wayne, and I do understand that. But what you're really saying on this call is that there is a potential business kickback benefit to the donor country. That's your point, isn't it?
Of course, that's the only reason why it's held. It's because the business case for it it cannot be. You cannot argue against it.
Do you know something, Wayne?
Jobs in factories here.
Do you know something, Wayne? You are the first person I've met in 20 years of discussing this issue that has made this point, and I would love to see.
No, Nigel, that is not correct. If you read the literature, there's loads of literature written on this, on international economics and that sort of thing. Loads of literature on this subject.
Well, do you know what, Wayne? Do you know what, Wayne? I've read about soft power. I've read about using the foreign aid budget to win influence around the world. I've read about using the foreign aid budget to sometimes win foreign contracts. I've read about much of that. What I've never read, Wayne, and I really mean this, I've never read a single document or single letter in 20 years that has ever suggested to me that the foreign aid that we commit to Zimbabwe, for argument's sake, finishes up with British factories manufacturing goods and getting the benefit of that business. And if you can point me as to where I can go to read this, I will.
There are loads of literature on this.
Where?
Email you all over in any bookshop. You can Google it. There are loads of stuff on foreign aid. This is a very much studied area.
Well, Wayne, you've made your point. And I do understand the soft power arguments. You're the second person to make that point tonight. And I'm going to Google it. I'm sure as we speak, lots of people are. Wayne, I thank you very much for your call and a very different point of view. Not one, I have to say, that I'm familiar with at all. Ollie in Hereford, are you happy with the way we're administering the foreign aid budget?
Good evening, Nigel. It's a pleasure to speak to you.
Good evening.
I'm unfortunately going to largely agree with you, much to, I'm sure, your dismay. I am in favour of closing the Department for International Development, which, of course, was a big selling point of UKIP's general election manifesto. This just gone general election. I believe, of course, in small government. I think that it should be the government's right to earmark our money to give to disadvantaged people. I'm in favour of disadvantaged people getting money from people who can afford to give that money away, but I think it should be the right of the people to be able to say we want to give that money or we don't want to give that money, and who we're giving it to, and being able to vote with your wallet exactly where that money's going to go.
And it's even worse, Ollie, isn't it, when it's an arbitrary target and you learn that a government department is spending 98% of the budget in the last few weeks just to make sure they, match this ridiculous target. So I don't think this is working at any level at all, Ollie. I really don't. But Ollie, would you be prepared yourself personally to give money to disaster relief or foreign aid of any kind at all?
Well, yeah, and I'd be able to see who the organisation who I choose or choose not to give money to where they would be spending that money, who they would be spending that on, and I'd have the assurance that they'd be spending it on people who actually need it, and then I'd be able to say this, as some organisations do, they're promoting the trade of human traffickers.
A case-by-case basis where you could see the merits of where the money was being spent. Ollie, you're a star. Thank you. My last call of the evening is Simon from Chelmsford. Simon, good evening.
Good evening, Nigel.
Hi. Your view, please.
Well, my view is David Cameron's foreign aid, how can I say, scheme, for the want of a better word. I totally disagree with it in every respect. But I may have a solution that people have probably forgotten about that could be put on the table.
Go on.
Because I agree that some aid should be given when it does benefit our country. And I think with Brexit on the horizon, I think the Commonwealth, we need to refocus our relationship or recalibrate our relationship with the Commonwealth. And when I was a young kid in the 60s, I was dragged around the country by my father, who worked for the Commonwealth Development Corporation. A government body that used to set up infrastructure and industry in our Commonwealth countries. And by and large, they bought a lot of the equipment, materials, machinery, trucks, trains, you name it, from UK companies to export to the Commonwealth. And I think perhaps it'd be a good idea that we refocus.
Yeah, that's interesting, Simon. You know, the point you're making, Wayne, who's from the Caribbean, was kind of making the point that it can work like that, and he was talking about Canada. And yeah, there could be some mutuality in it. But Simon, I tell you something, if we gave these Commonwealth countries tariff-free access to our markets, that'd be worth more to them than any trade deal ever possibly could be. Simon, I thank you very much for your call. I'm running out of time. Richard on Facebook says, cut foreign aid from 0.7% of GDP to 0.5%. Well, it was Cameron that reversed that. And it is an arbitrary... I can't think of an issue over which the people and the politicians are more divided. You know, of our 651 MPs in Westminster, I don't know, but I'd guess 640 are in favour of the current foreign aid budget, and yet it's clear that a vast majority of you are not happy with the way in which this is being administered. Frankly, when you learn that money is going to places like North Korea, this is nothing less than a betrayal of taxpayers' money. You've been listening to the Nigel Farage Show here on LBC. I'm back tomorrow from 7. Coming up at 10, it's Ian Collins. But up next, it's Clive Bull.